quorum, but go ahead and start. You ready?
Yes.
Okay. So I don't know that we really need to even call the meeting.
Should I go ahead?
Do you want me to do that update?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So I wanted to give you guys just a preview a little bit, just talk through a couple of the items that we're going to have on the November 5th agenda. It's actually going to be quite a bit. So we have just finished the draft of what we want to replace the traffic calming policy, and we're calling it the Neighborhood Traffic Management Program. So we've had a group of people, Adam Heffley, Brandon McGuire, Jessica Mortinger, and me working on that. And really we want the program to be flexible so that we can adjust as we see. We don't want it to be so confined, to certain requirements like the current one is, where we can't make adjustments as we're doing the evaluation, seeing what's working. We want to be able to adjust. So the point of the policy really is to kind of outline our goals and some of the things we may do. What we'd like to do is have it be like a yearly budget item when we recommend the budget, that we say what the plan is for the spending that year. So, but it's going to be a more comprehensive program that can take into account engineering, still in some engineering, education, encouragement, enforcement, evaluation. So it will incorporate more of those E's than just the engineering. And we think we're hoping to have more of an impact citywide versus just then on a small street, a few hundred feet of a small street that are impacted by a speed hump. So I'll be bringing that to you guys in November. The hope is that December 4th it can go to City Commission. So kind of a quick turnaround, but I just met with legal and they're okay with a couple word changes, and then we'll get it out to you guys. It's very short, one-page program, meant to be kind of a general overview, not real specific with a specific plan every year. So that's the first one. This complete streets policy we're hoping in November to actually do the approval of, so that a recommendation of approval so that it can go to City Commission December 4th also. And then there's also a bunch of ordinances with our traffic code we talked about that we're trying to update so that we don't have to do an ordinance for every sign, and we can have be a little more responsive to residents when they request something. So been working with legal on a ton of changes to our traffic code just to kind of simplify things a little bit. So those will be the items that we're going to kind of present as one package at November 5th meeting for Transportation Commission, and then December 4th for City Commission. So I'd like to get as many of people present at that meeting as possible.
I'm sure I'll have a bunch of questions in November. I do have one. The first part of it, what did you call that?
Neighborhood Traffic Management Program.
Neighborhood Traffic Management Program. Will that include the parking?
No,
No. Why?
because that's a whole separate. This is to really deal with concerns of speeding, all
Okay.
that type of thing. So this is really meant to kind of replace that traffic calming policy.
Mm-hmm.
So that budget item that's in the budget for traffic calming, we'd like to rename to this. And this would be more dealing with really people feeling safe to walk and bike in their neighborhoods and drive. I mean,
But it could still involve removing parking. So
It could.
that sites are better.
but it could involve removing parking. It could involve striping parking to make the lanes feel narrower, but it won't involve no parking or as far as if somebody requests, I want no parking, that doesn't fall under this. That's going to be a separate administrative process.
No one
So-
should ever say that.
Unfortunately, it gets said a lot. And it's not going to be meant to deal with stop signs. That's a different request. There's different warrants. This is more about like educational programs and going through, and maybe we install speed feedback signs for a short-term basis, and probably more use of temporary speed humps or different things like that we can move around the city. So I think there'll be some different strategies, but really kind of focused on a lot of the same thing as the traffic calming policy, but expanding that a little bit to now we're looking at yielding to pedestrians and those other concerns we're hearing. So, but yeah, it won't be like the parking permit
Right.
thing. I think that's a
That
separate
makes sense.
conversation.
Yeah.
Because that's about who's parking there. And
Yeah. So the traffic calming policy goes away totally?
yes, so the intent would be to basically get rid of the resolution, repeal the resolution that set that traffic calming policy, and then have a new resolution with this new program. That and there would be a lot of more analysis of what's working and kind of some of the data, and yearly reports back to Transportation Commission and City Commission on what we're seeing with that data, how we're impacting the community. So I think you'll see a lot more like feedback from it and things like that. It will be less responsive to the one-off request of, I want a speed hump, but we want to, if we go into a neighborhood, we want to look at the neighborhood, not just a street. So that'll be more focused.
Last question, I promise. The old prioritization list for traffic calming, does it just get wiped out?
That's our recommendation, because we would spend the next 3 years funding that list and make no progress otherwise. So our recommendation would be that they would all be notified of the new program, and as we develop the yearly thing, we foresee, I don't know if it would be, we've got some things we're looking at for the first year or two that would probably be more of a citywide approach. But at a certain point, we would probably have where neighborhoods can apply to be part of it, and we would select a certain number of neighborhoods a year that we were going to go in and work in. And then the next year, we would take more applications, and a certain amount of the funds every year would be used for something like that. And then some of the funds may be used to help with some targeted enforcement, and maybe we do some educational campaigns that we actually bring consultants in who are a lot more skilled at that than we are. So it's going to be multifaceted, I think, much more so than our current.
Well, I lied. I'm concerned with the transition, you know, from taking this old list that people have put their hearts into, have the expectation. I know you guys have thought about this long and hard, much more than I have, but I think the transition is something that, you know, really needs some careful thought. And I don't know if that would involve some of the projects that seem to stand out. And I haven't looked at that list for months.
That's going to be a different definition for every person.
Yeah.
Do you have neighborhoods that have a higher density of these projects already?
I think they're pretty like scattered, and that it's not solving a problem. So it would be doing it just to appease them, to then have the street next to them go, well, what about me?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the problem we're facing, right? We did Main Street, then Missouri and Arkansas, then, you know, it's Lincoln, then next it's Lyon, and it's just you're chasing the problem, because that traffic now just goes to the next street. And I just don't really think it's having the impact people are hoping. That person who lives right by that speed hump may have some impact, but anybody else, it's not really benefiting the community as a whole. And it's not addressing,
Unintended consequence.
yeah, and it's not addressing the citywide issue. And so I think it's going to be hard, but I also think we really have seen that this isn't, as soon as you do those, now everybody who's been waiting to submit this whole year is going to be like, what about mine too? And what about mine, you know, it's kind of a,
Education is gonna be.
Right.
education will be a
Is it
big
possible
piece of it.
to be ready with what those consequences have been in the past, like when we did this, then this happened? Are there any of those?
I think a lot of it's anecdotal. I don't know that we have a lot of
There's no facts.
data that says, I just know like the people in Missouri and Arkansas were like, well, you did it on Main and you pushed all the traffic to our street. Or you repaved our street and now people are driving too fast.
Right, 'cause
I mean,
it's nice.
Like I said, it's more comments we've heard than it's actual hard data probably.
Yeah, in the current list, it's, if it's signed at 20 miles an hour, it scores a lot higher than if it's signed at 30 miles an hour, and some weren't approved when it was 30. The speed was reduced to 20, people kept speeding, and then it scores higher, and so it's just, the whole scoring system needs to be revamped, and I think that the list needs to, the priorities are gonna change with the new policy.
Yeah.
The priorities aren't gonna be that list. Some of the projects may still be priorities, but I think that's the goal, I guess, but.
Well, one thing I like about it is it's more strategic, and it'll
Yeah.
make better use of our time than, are we gonna approve speed humps on Lincoln or Forest? You know?
Well, and then they sit on it.
Yeah.
So the problem now is it gives people this false hope. I do all this work and I show up and we do all this and it gets approved, and then like for the next 5 years they're like, when am I getting it? When am I getting it? When? And they may never. And so I think it's been like this. They think they got this win by getting on a list, but it may never be funded the way we're working right now because other projects come in and then score higher.
Yeah.
So
And the same thing, it's the same with enforcement too, because the police are getting requests to enforce different streets, and And so we're gonna prioritize those as well on the enforcement side.
Yeah.
So
With a lot
it's
more data behind it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That will drive them to specific streets at specific times, because we know with the data that that's where the issue is. So I think we're gonna try to be a lot smarter and use our resources better. And I don't think this is gonna save staff time, but I think it'll be a lot more holistic approach, and I think it's gonna make a much bigger impact than the way we were doing it. So we just wanted to give you guys a little bit of kind of a
Thanks.
preview of that, and you'll be seeing it come out for the November 5th meeting, so. We can start this topic now. Did you want to?
Want me to start?
Yep.
Okay.
Should just be down below if you
Yeah.
scroll. Oh, there it is.
This is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I'm used to using the Mac, so I'm struggling here. Okay. Well, I thought what we'd do today is, I'm going to start by going through our process and sharing a few of our actual documents that we used during the process. I think it's important that people understand this has taken several months, and we did go through some periods where we weren't.
Sorry. Go ahead, Steve. I was just trying to help.
Yeah, okay, I can scroll down.
I saw Donna.
Yeah.
I mean, I was
Yeah.
squint, and I was
Yeah. We went through some slow periods, but I think, we can show you that we spent a lot of time on the detail on this. And I'm going to start by just going through as quickly as I can our process, and I'm going to touch a little bit on the actual draft that we're looking at today, and hopefully everybody's had a chance to look that over, at least read it once or twice, and try to relate our process to where we ended up on that draft. Then I'm going to pass the baton to Amanda and Dave, and I think I'd like for you guys to, fill in the gaps on the draft policy, and then talk about the checklist, which is really kind of something that you guys developed when we were done. We started, myself, Catherine, Michelle, Amanda, and Dave. We might have actually started before Amanda came to town. And I think in the spring of last year, we kind of got this thing kicked off. Maybe it was a little later than that. But the group met every couple of weeks for several months. And first we kind of like, okay, how do we get our arms around this thing? And if anybody's spent any time on the Smart Growth of America website, it's an enormous amount of information and resources, and a lot of things we deal with around bike and ped stuff, and really multimodal stuff too, for that matter, they deal with. But we looked at, I don't know how many years they've been grading and rating complete streets policies around the country, quite a while. And somebody helped me out here. Dave, I know you attended the Emiko Atherton event at the Carnegie Building about a year and a half ago. And she is, I think, one of the executive people at Smart Growth. And she spent a whole day. Catherine was there, I think. I don't know if Mark was there. And we went through the policy that was in place at that time and had some workshops and, kind of obviously tried to get this moved on to the next step. And I think it was successful in that manner. I just put down here, Smart Growth is a coalition of advocacy organizations that have a stake in how metropolitan expansion affects the environment, quality of life, and economic sustainability. We looked at, and I'll pull this up in a second, the 10 elements of a complete street policy. that smart growth has developed over time, and is actually their criteria for grading complete streets policies in cities. And we kind of got it to a fork in the road because there's a squillion of them out there. And it might have been really easy. We might have been done a year ago if we'd have just said, oh, that one looks good. You know, let's just grab that and edit it and move on. But we dedicated ourselves to a process that we intended to end up with a policy unique to Lawrence. We all live in Lawrence. We know a lot about how Lawrence works, and we hope that our process enhanced a document that doesn't look like others. It looks like a document that would be appropriate for Lawrence. I'm just going to go through our process here, and then I'll show you this documentation before I hand it off to Amanda and Dave. I'm going to show you an Excel workbook that documents our process and how that was used to further refine the policy language in a Word document that went through some evolutions also. And then I'll finally, like I said, hand this off to Dave and Amanda and have a look at the document, which has been through legal, and legal has basically said, okay. That doesn't mean that we can't, you know, tweak this a little bit, but personally, I think we're in pretty good shape. And
we have more flexibility, I think, with the checklist as far as legal.
yeah,
Because that's more of a working document. So obviously, we can definitely recommend any changes to the policy, but there's certain words and language that legal very specifically wanted. So if there's those type of requests, we'll have to run it back by them. And so.
well, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I just think that when you all have a look at this, this is something that we're going to be using down the road when we're evaluating certainly just about any project that comes in front of the Transportation Commission. And I'm not sure exactly which item it is, but one of the requirements that Smart Growth puts out there is that we look at all projects, not just the 19th Street extensions or the big ones. We're really supposed to be looking at renovation work, at new construction, at really the whole gamut of stuff that comes into the Public Works Department. That doesn't mean that we're going to look at every project that Amanda and Dave get, but I think that in the context of complete streets, when these projects are presented to the Transportation Commission, this will give us the ability to ask questions and to understand the process that the engineers have gone through in getting to their recommended design and showing us the process. Spend some time with this. This is where we started. These just outline the 10 elements of a complete streets policy, and we use this as a guide. And a little bit more with our process. The second tab in here, sorry about how some of this isn't, it's not important that you read everything on here. What's important is that you understand the process that we went through. We took each one of those 10 items, we outlined it. Smart Growth America has points. They have a grading system for all of the policies. And so we had those points off to the side, and we began to develop the wording for our policy in the right-hand column. And we kind of divided up the 10 between Michelle and Catherine and I, and began with just, you know, worksheets like this that were more or less brainstorming worksheets, and we weren't trying to write the policy. We were just trying to explore some ideas about what each one of these elements would contribute to a complete streets policy. And I think this is kind of useful in terms of the history of this stuff, but this was really how we went through each one of these elements. We started here, then we went back to the previous sheet that I showed you and started developing the policy. So this has a bunch of tabs, and it'll make you dizzy. And we've got, we started out with a list of resources to look at, and this is a very rudimentary checklist that we started with. Dave and Amanda, you'll see here in a little while, have taken it much further beyond what we've done here. But I wanted you all to see this workbook. Let me see if I can find, and I can't.
It might be in one of those documents.
Let's see.
I don't know which one you're looking for.
I think it's this one. Nope. Okay. And just like that Excel workbook, I'm not gonna, I'd ask everybody to go back and look at this stuff, but we did the same thing here, trying to get this thing to the next level, and brought it out of Excel and put it into a Word document and began to develop the language under each one of these items. So I'm pretty proud of our process, and I think it'd be easy enough to come in here and throw the policy out and say, what do you think? But the fact that we went through this over several months, literally, to get to this point, I think is a pretty big deal. And I won't go through each one, but you can see that we didn't really go back and score ourselves, but we certainly paid attention to the elements that Smart Growth has come up with. I'm going to just pause to see if there's any questions. Or Catherine, do you want to add anything at this stage? Any questions, comments? Anybody? Okay. Where's the actual,
It should be
is it right up here at the top?
That should, well, yeah, it should be open.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think I'm going to let you do this, Amanda, or Dave, and then I want to come back and add a few things after you've done that.
Well, walking through, I guess, some of the text of the policy, one of the things that staff feels important with these type of policies is we can't bind the commission to, we must do complete streets in every instance. So with that in mind, we walked through, took some of the language from the Smart Growth America to put into the document for how it will apply to the city's projects. And the main things that I think that's an enhancement to our last policy are the checklist, which is more of documentation, and then the performance measures that we have listed in here, which was something that was clearly absent from the last policy, was tracking performance over time. So, and I don't really plan on reading through all this, but I wanted to go through at least the checklist, the exceptions, and the performance measures. So the intention is for this checklist that we would walk through at the conceptual design phase, this checklist, see, I'm going to pull it up here, the different complete streets elements that apply to a specific project, criteria that, design criteria that pertains to the project as far as volume of traffic, lanes of traffic.
It's the Excel file.
Oh, okay, there it is.
No, that's not it. It got closed in the hole.
Actually, it's
It's on here.
what's that?
Where's the confidence apply? It's not applying to your maintenance thing. It would apply to, brand new construction.
It would apply to brand new construction.
Right.
Yeah.
So where's,
So probably read in that in this a little bit.
Yeah, so I'll go back through that. It would apply to new construction projects. It would not apply to street maintenance projects, sidewalk maintenance, or other maintenance funded projects. So smaller type projects, mill and overlay, micro surfacing, crack seal, wouldn't apply to those projects.
Restriping mats. So there's no overlaying stuck in the bike lanes.
Well, that was a CIP project
Yeah.
that, so it's a little different than the maintenance.
More new projects and reconstruction projects. So when we're reconstructing 23rd Street,
Right.
Castle,
I think we do have in there
Ninth
though
Street.
that, you know, when possible, we're still gonna take these into account, so like when Steve goes in, mills and overlays a street, and it's set to have bike lanes and the width is there, he'll stripe the bike lanes. You know, if it's a pavement marking thing, if the width is there, but he's not gonna move a curb out 5 feet to make room for a bike lane.
Right.
But he'll do
Yeah.
like, yeah, within the scope of, you know, what he's doing already, he will do it as possible.
Does that mean?
And I actually think it's pretty clear in here, if you read section 3, applicability, there's a couple of sentences that describe new construction retrofit, and then it also addresses maintenance.
Right.
So spend some time
Well, yeah,
looking at
that's
it.
what I'm saying. Street maintenance is defined as mill and overlay.
Yeah,
So that wouldn't necessarily be. Sort of like Mass, which was basically kind of a mill and overlay.
Well, that was a lane
Wouldn't
reconfiguration
Yeah,
project,
we
was
did that.
actually, the mill and overlay was subsidiary to a lane reconfiguration, so that was a more substantial project. I would say that wasn't the mill and overlay maintenance program.
yeah.
Okay.
if you take mill and overlay literally, you're gonna mill and overlay and you're gonna restripe.
Exactly how it was,
That's-
basically,
That's,
minimal changes.
you know, that wouldn't be anything that would, you know, be a complete street
Right.
matter. But if you start thinking about mass, like Amanda said, yeah, for sure.
That's what
Yeah.
I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
Is there a physical thing that cuts it, or is it gonna be the funding category?
Well, I think that it's the intent of the project. So the intent of that project was the lane reconfiguration. The mill and overlay was an extra thing that we thought before we spend all this money on this pavement marking, we should probably mill and overlay it. But the intent of the project was the lane reconfiguration. So I think that's what we'll go back to, is what is the intent of the project? What is making this project be an important project when we're gonna do it? And that one was not mill and overlay. So, but again, if it's like Steve going in and doing a mill and overlay as part of pavement maintenance, that's different, because generally, he's doing the same layout that was there before, unless he can make it better with bike lanes or something like that. So, and obviously, we'll have to, there may be projects on that cusp that we
Right, that's what I'm.
bring and ask, you know, to the group, or
Yeah.
make decisions and let you guys know, but
We've
We'll have to see
routinely
as we-
reviewed the street maintenance project in
To see if
conjunction
there's
with
something
like the
you can do.
bikeway plan. So if it's, we've added sharrows where we haven't had sharrows on bike routes. And there have been some certain instances where we had enough room to stripe bike lanes, like on Princeton and Peterson, where we did it.
Cause you could, cause there's.
Yeah. So, yeah, so there's probably not a clear, you know, if it's maintenance, we still will think about those things, but the policy does not apply to the typical maintenance projects. But the concepts still apply, so the staff will still be cognizant of that.
and can you mention the multimodal?
Yeah, so when we're going through on our checklist, we have the staff's multimodal team, which has members of pretty much all city departments, and so we meet every other week. And so in those meetings, we'll have opportunity to review projects, go through the checklist, talk, you know, we got utilities department in there, we've got transit in the room, Parks and Rec,
Planning.
to coordinate, discuss projects, and kind of walk through the checklist with that group. So that's the intent of applying the checklist to each project. I wanted to go through that. Where was that at?
I think it's just on
It's on the zip drive. Okay.
the other, that one.
Here we go. We couldn't find.
It's having issues, that's not it, it's just. It's having issues with the connection here. So did that a minute ago too. Try again. There you go.
All right, there we go. So we'll walk through this, and we've, with the group, tested it on a couple projects, see how it worked. Some projects in the very preliminary stage, we won't have all of the answers, I guess, to fill this in, but there are certainly some things that you can identify early on in the project with the checklist. If it's on a safe route to school, yes, then we're referencing the plans for safe routes to school or the plans from the bikeway network or transit into the project. So those things are up here in project information, safe routes to school, bus route, bikeway network, is there existing biker sidewalk accommodations on the project. Walking through some of the other considerations, is it close to school, university, shopping, commercial area, employment center, community facility. Some of those same things in that list were things that helped prioritize the bike ped network and the heat map of where folks are expected to be biking. Going through, here's some of the constraints. If we're reviewing a project and there's limited right-of-way, it's where we would make the note here. If there's other utilities that are in the way, we have Westar major transmission lines that sometimes are obstacles to street projects, environmental concerns. So we've got a list of constraints in here. Moving down, here's where we start going through some of Complete Streets elements. And so again, Complete Streets isn't all or nothing. It's a bunch of different ideas and elements. And so here's where we would identify those different elements on the project. Traffic calming elements, narrower driving lanes, or reducing the lanes. Here's some more physical design considerations with pedestrian bridge, curb, bump outs. Do we look through pedestrian accommodations, sidewalks, crosswalks, mid-block crosswalks, lighting, street furniture? Here's some bikeway considerations with different bike facilities, transit facilities, the situation of on-street parking, if it exists, where, how that impacts the project. Streetscaping's an element of Complete Streets. Where are the trees going to go? Do we have landscape medians or median islands? And ADA accessibility. And here's a checklist for the different departments to review and be notified of the project. And then if there's any added maintenance projections for the project, to note those down here for additional Complete Streets elements. So that's
So everything's a good yes or no, kind of simple.
yeah.
What about when you hire traffic, is there any qualification for that?
For
When you're going back, is there higher pedestrian traffic? Yeah, is there a high amount of pedestrian and bike traffic? Any guidance as to what's high?
on defining that, yeah, we talked about that a little, but I don't know if we came up with any measure. Some of it is subjective. Complete Streets itself is subjective into so that's
It's just the more objective you get, the less grief you can get.
It's
Yeah.
hard because
It's-
it's context is different if it's a local street or if it's a arterial street. Your values are going to be different.
Right.
So is it higher than similar streets around it is probably a, you know, like, is this, well, we've already got safe routes to school, but if it's near the university, is it a place where a ton of students are crossing? You know, and I think that it's hard to define a number because it's really in relation to the rest of the surrounding area. So yeah, it was hard to say what that is. And I think we could even change that to say, is there a high amount of bicycle and pedestrian well, it's the crashes, is there we did say the last 3 years, is there a history of bicycles? So we didn't say how many, we just, if there is any bicycle pedestrian crashes in the last 3 years, list it.
And I think we would expect the explanation, whether it's yes or no, to be filled out on some of these to kind of explain what the assumptions are.
And I think those would sort of feed into why you are putting a certain feature in versus why you're making an exemption. So if you say there's a high amount of bicycle traffic, then you need to justify if you're not putting bike lanes there.
Yeah, there would be less like
Yeah.
excuse for not doing that at that
I mean,
point.
so
'cause-
if you've noted that, then you have to address it later on as an explanation for why you're doing one feature or not doing a feature.
One thing we're trying to accomplish with this is, in a public scenario, when, a project is being reviewed, I know over the last several months, we've had a lot of questions from the public about, well, did you consider X? And one of the ideas behind a comprehensive checklist is we can, most of the time, say yes. And here it is on our checklist, and here's a note,
That's a good thing.
and
The downside to making a policy is then, if somebody doesn't get what they want, then they come back and say, why didn't you follow your policy? If they interpret something in here saying, okay, well, I think this is a high volume, why didn't you, and then you can end up staff having to fight that battle.
well, I don't know.
That's why you tie it down really well.
This is part of the policy, but would you say this is a policy? This is more of a process
It's
Means
part of the
of
policy.
evaluation.
Yeah, it's part of the policy to document the project.
Yeah.
I think this helps them answer those questions. So if
Mhm.
you do or don't do something, then they can say, well, this is how we evaluated it.
And that's the important thing to get in there. How we evaluate it, so it's.
And why we made the decision.
Yeah, and especially when we have so many different folks that design projects. We design some projects in-house. We've got consultants to design projects, and so that they can also look through these things and consider those early on in the process versus getting to field check or office check stage and say, hey, why didn't we think about a raised crosswalk or a median, and then we have to go back and redesign. And so, I see your point. It's something we talked about on defining some of these things, that it's tough to do, but it's more of the consideration and making sure you go through and think about all the different facets of the complete streets. But if there's this is while we're having this discussion today too, if there's something that anyone else feels is important.
If you're calling it a policy, as opposed to just an evaluation tool. If it's your policy, that's.
What's the title on the checklist?
Well, it's project information and complete street element review. So I don't see anything in the checklist that requires you to take a specific action. It's just this is the context of the project that we're
It's
working
trying
on.
to make the decisions we make very transparent.
Yeah, it's that it should be used. And then that's part of the policy. I mean, the words in the policy is a complete streets checklist should be used in planning and conceptual design phase.
But there's no if this, then that shall do that.
Yeah. And some projects, it's not conceivable to do it at 30% design phase. It may not be.
But there's a checklist too, you're gonna bring this to the Transportation Commission, so this would be what's in the agenda. This would be what the public sees.
Mhm.
This is their first chance to communicate with them.
Mhm.
And that's why it's important to make sure something people can't really pick apart.
Mhm.
I also
Yeah.
think, though, that you're almost making it worse by saying if there's more than 10 pedestrians in an hour, because on a local street, that might be a lot, and on an arterial street, that's not high volume.
Yeah.
So it's very hard to put a number on that.
Huh?
And then they go, well, but there's 11, so why didn't you do it? And you're like, well, the day we counted, there was 9. You know, I think that sometimes
Well, or there's
you
that
paint
two
yourself
of
in a
them
corner.
and they're both blind.
Right.
Or disabled in some other way, or kids, or whatever it is, right? So,
It's,
Or there's
it's,
none now, but there's also no sidewalks.
right.
But there should be because there's a school and housing.
It's tough, some of these we're trying to make something like this scientific kind of process with all this data that's really hard because it varies everywhere. So,
If we think back to the discussion we had on, one that's coming to mind is 23rd Street from Louisiana to Mass. And when it came to us, we had, we were kind of deer in the headlights, like, gee, we have all these questions. And the engineers had thought through a lot of this stuff with respect to property lines and easements and all of this stuff. And having a checklist like this that we see before we go to a commission meeting, and I think we can be more intelligent and more useful, other than just trying to have Dave and Amanda explain, well, that easement's 5 feet, so it's impractical to do something.
Even for the
Yeah.
public, it'll be good, because they see it
Yeah.
online, like right there.
Exactly, exactly. Mhm.
do you want to go to the our evaluation?
On
The
the checklist.
factors? No, the factors we're using to the next section. The performance measure.
Oh, yeah, I was gonna get to that. On the exceptions here, I think we had some exceptions listed in the last policy, but we detailed them out here again. Let me know if there's any questions on that. I think it's pretty straightforward. And then on the performance measures, this is kind of a new section, new piece to Complete Streets policy. Some of these, or all of these, I guess, are being tracked by the MPO annually. And so this would be something that we could look at the end of the year or the beginning of the year and say, hey, we made this much progress over the last year, and be able to track it over time. So these are some of the things that are already being done by the MPO, but this puts it into the policies so that the staff would report it. I think the plan would be to report it to the Transportation Commission annually.
Yeah, they're actually out of T2040, so we're trying to tie back to our plans. And these were performance measures that we pulled out of T2040 that we thought were really specific to this policy. So thought it'd be best to track the same data, like have the same data that they're using for that instead of some different data that, you had to kind of, it's hard when you present this number and this number to the public, they look like the same data and they're not. There's a lot of that where we're looking at this, but then we change it a little bit for this other policy. It's easier just to be consistent on these, so we try to go back to T2040.
These could change over time though, and it's not limited to these. So if we
Yeah.
decide that there's other data available, part of a lot of the performance measures that got established in T24 was based on available data, right? Data sets. So if it's determined in the future there's some other data set collected that would be appropriate to track as part of this, I think this list is not meant to be exclusive.
But this is one of the things that I think from the last policy and looking through the scoring criteria of the Complete Streets, this is one of the ones that we're making a lot of progress on with this revision of the policy. So, any other questions on anything in here? Again, we're looking for any feedback, and we're gonna present it here at the regular meeting early in November.
I just want to add a couple of things, Dave. I went through the 10 items, and then I did a search in our document to see if we addressed them. And after I read it the first time, I thought, oh, gee, I think maybe we missed a few. But honestly, we did a real good job. If you look at section 2, it addresses vision and intent and benefit all users. That was a big deal for smart growth. If you look at section 3, commitment to all phases projects, and I noted the checklist, as something that addresses, the comprehensive nature of it. And item 4, clear expectations and specific exceptions. I mean, we did a really good job on that. And a couple of them, I don't know if it's worth going back. The number 5 is jurisdiction. And I noted maybe we need to discuss that. And I don't know if item D under section 4 covers that. Do you think we need to say more about just the jurisdictional aspects of this? i.e., is it a state road? Is it a,
I don't know if that's what they're getting to. What does it actually say in Smart Growth America?
yeah. Requires interagency coordination between government departments and partner agencies.
So I think we were looking at that, that multimodal portion really being a big
Oh.
part of that, like, because it's
Okay.
multi-departmental.
Yeah,
So that's what we were trying to go back to, that was really that, I think their intent is it's not just one group
Yeah.
that's looking at it. So we looked at that more as being interdepartmental with involving Parks and Rec and involving transit.
okay. Does it make sense to mention any of those?
What's that?
I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
and then we have on the checklist, we have, did you get USD
Oh,
497?
okay.
And that's a
Okay,
good point, John.
okay, good. Well, just going down, the performance measures, we hit that real well. The exceptions, number 7, land use and context. Under 4F, really kind of, that was that point we made under 4F. And the last 2 items, number 9 is funding. And I'm not too worried about 10 because 10 is next steps, and we're underway really with the next steps of implementation. So I think we're there, but they did point out, and if I could read what they said, project selection criteria provides specific criteria to encourage funding prioritization for complete streets implementation.
I think our discussion, if I remember back, was that these are only happening on projects that are already in a CIP. So that's kind of a unique, I don't know that fits with our, the way we operate, because really you're not doing this to see what you're going to put in the CIP. The CIP is based on other factors, and this is really, we're not going to do this on every possible project in the city. We're going to do this on things that are in the CIP. So we didn't really know how to fit that into our policy unless you guys have some ideas, but
Well, I've heard.
and it
of
was
pe-
hard too to commit the commission to fund things that may not be the priority because
Yeah.
they fit this complete streets policy.
Yeah. Well, there could be a misconception sometimes that you're required to do a complete street, but you can't afford it, and I don't know if there's any way to address that, responsible budgeting, responsible, being responsible about spending money. I don't know what I'm trying to say, something like that. just seems to me like there's nothing in here. I totally get what you're saying about the CIP, but it just seems like maybe it's missing a statement, even a general statement about the feasibility, financial feasibility of all projects.
Well, I think it does say that you should do this unless it's, I think under the exception that talks about it substantially more than what is the exception? Excessively disproportionate, yeah, to the project cost, is,
Okay, D.
I don't know if that, under the exceptions, if that.
I missed that. I'm fine with that.
Okay.
I think we can
too,
check that off.
we struggled a little bit going through we tried to be realistic when going through the Smart Growth America. We weren't always trying to get the 5 points on everything. We were saying if that 5 points is not realistic in the community here in Lawrence, we're okay with 3. And so I think we had a lot of those conversations. This isn't going to be the highest scoring complete streets policy they've seen, but I think it's realistic to be implemented in this community. And that was our goal.
Yeah.
Is not to put something out there that wasn't ever going to work. So there was some of the things you could look at and go, man, we really didn't hit the highest number on that, and we're aware of that. But we had a lot of those conversations.
Until they tie our scoring to actual funding,
Right.
grants and stuff.
Yeah.
So,
I think the thing is to try to really make some progress in this in the community. I really think we're actually doing a fairly good job. We just haven't probably been tracking it very well.
Mm-hmm.
And this kind of sets up.
well, this also provides a means for like when we do, or when we are getting rated again, we can have data.
Anything else?
So will this be kind of what we do in November, a similar kind of presentation? Okay.
I think we'll have to talk, Steve, how we want to present it, because I think we're trying to come up with a staff presentation that's comprehensive with all these policies, and really present them as one package, this trap neighborhood, because they all are somewhat interconnected. Jessica's going to be doing a little bit of a presentation on how all these connect back to the plans and the planning effort. So we're really going to try to have it be a very comprehensive presentation that says, okay, here's all the planning, this is how all of these pieces fit into that, and here's more details about that. So we were hoping for this to be the one where we went through this working stuff, and then that was going to be more of a presentation, was how we envisioned it. So that, because this was really supposed to be the working meeting where we went through the real details. So.
Let us know how we can help.
So if you guys have any additional feedback, those that have been involved in helping out with this, or it's what we're here to get here before the November meeting, so we can get this completed by the end of the year. So I think one of the goals that we had at the beginning of the year, so it'd be great to get it done by the end of the year.
Good job. Yeah, we really we're hoping this can get recommended for approval in November, so it can stay on that track for December. Yeah. So please, if you see something that will cause you concern at the meeting, let us know so we can try to adjust it ahead of time.
So once a policy is adopted, I mean, you can't just put a comma somewhere later, right? I mean,
it's going to be a resolution, so any changes would have to
So
repeal the resolution. And
my point is, let's
yeah.
have a good look at it now.
Yep.
You know.
We also just want to make sure we're not painting us so much in a corner that there's no flexibility. So it's a fine line there.
Well, I think we ought to make bets on our score with smart growth next year. We ought to send it in and get a score, don't you think?
I'm not sure how they're doing it now. Does that
They changed it a little this last year.
I don't know if
Oh,
they're
did they?
actually scoring anymore or not.
Yeah, they're still scoring.
Are they?
Mhm.
Because there were some changes to that.
I think they do it every 4 years, 2 or 4 years.
I think the TA
Um,
needs to give you points for having a big streets policy, but then you're not good it is.
Well, we have one. We have one currently,
Right.
which isn't vastly different in some respects, but this is the checklist and the
Yeah, the
performance
checklist
measures.
is huge. The
the-
documentation and the performance measures are the big things. Those are things we were getting questions about when we started this process and we had the workshop last May of last year. Those are the things that were clearly things that were identified as things that we needed to improve on. But I think the policies were great over the last 8 to 10 years, however long we've had it. We've applied it well in projects, and there's been only a few project instances where we've used exemptions where it was just not even feasible to do a sidewalk or whatever it may be, so.
Well, honestly, Dave, I think, I don't know that the policy made as much difference as just you guys doing the right thing. Because when I read that policy, I'm like, what does this mean? You know, it just didn't have any meat to it about, you know, certainly the checklist kind of ties it all together, but I read the policy and it was just, it just didn't.
I think this is a lot more direct
Mhm.
and to the
Yeah.
point, but I think it gets to the same goal as the current
Mhm.
policy.
Mhm.
That's all we got. Anything else?
Okay,
All right.
Thanks.
Meeting
Thank you.
adjourned.
So this is how we're going over it with the